A very warm welcome to one and all. Myself, Achyut Kain, working as an assistant professor in Department of Civil Engineering, and I would like to extend my warm welcome to newly engaging part of the civil engineering, especially to the third semester. In this third semester, normally you will going to study the subjects pertaining to the core basic aspects of the civil engineering, and in the later aspects, you go to study regarding the applicable part related to whatever the studies that you come across in your consecutive third and fourth semester. One of the most interesting part of the subject that has been essential for whole civil engineering basis is none other than building materials and construction. Now, let us get to know what is the terminology related to the building materials and construction. If you're going to take the term building materials and construction, at an individual part, if you're going to refer any sorts of a meaning or in a dictionary, the building refers to the erection of the walls with the enclosures along with the roof as well as doors and windows. We call it as a building. Whereas the material means two or more simpler substances or maybe any elements that they combine to form a complex substances or the compounds. This may be either a solid in status or maybe a semi-solid in state. Finally, we come across the materials which are being naturally available as well as artificially available. Naturally available type of the materials, they may be in a pure state or in an impure state, whereas artificially available materials are being processed especially from the raw materials. Okay? Now, moving on to the construction. What is meant by construction? It is derived from the French word constructio, means together. The term construction, it refers to the orderly arrangement or assembly of materials in an design or properly planned manner. That is what we call it as a construction. Now, with respect to the terminologies, what we have referred totally the building, materials and constructions, let us get to know one by one. What is meant by a building I have stated already. Next step is what are the different types of the buildings, why it has been necessary. As we know that the basic amenities for the human life or an habitat to cease to exist for a longer duration of the time, it is basic aspect is related to the food, cloth and shelter. The shelter is a basic amenities to be settlement for human habitat. Okay. Moving on to the next part, it is why do we require the buildings? We need to get protected from the cold weather. That means they are the external agencies, even from the rain, sunlight, snow or any other such extrinsic variables which will be try to hamper the human settlement or an habitat. Therefore, a building is an enclosure. Normally, as per the National Building Code, whatever the materials which is being used or utilized, starting from the foundation, the plinth level, the walls, erection, and doors, windows, lintels, and then portfolios, as well as we also come across for the roof materials. These are all totally comprising a part of the building. Okay. Moving on to the next concept, why do we require the buildings? Buildings, it is required for various different purposes. For example, if you need to reside in a house, that we call it as a residential type of the building. Okay? Residential buildings. And then, if the building is utilized especially for the educational purpose or for any of the schools or maybe colleges, then we're going to call it as an institutional or educational buildings. Next, buildings, if it has been completely utilized for the treatment of the patients or maybe for the nursing purpose, then we're going to call it as the hospital or maybe any nursing home. Totally, we're going to call it as a healthcare type of the buildings. If the buildings is normally utilized for the recreational purposes, such as like a cinema halls or theaters, or maybe for any cultural activities, then there is a separate part of an establishments. Okay. Apart from this, if the buildings is mainly required for the industrial manufacturing purpose, then we call it as an industrial buildings. Moving on to the next further status, after the industrial, the next set of the buildings that we normally utilize is for the storage of the large portion of any of the manufactured goods or maybe products itself only, or there should be a proper arrangement for the procurement of the raw materials and its placement. For that purpose, we need to see that the proper utilities are to be provided. That kind of the buildings is what we call it as a storage type of buildings. Next type of the purposes, transportation buildings. What are those transportation buildings? Normally, if you take case in the railway stations, bus stand or airport, okay, or the port, what we call it as where the ship will be entering into the seashore or to the bay yard, that we are going to call it as a transportation type of the buildings. Next, another aspects, the building which is used for the research purpose or the laboratories, that is also another category. And the other set of the buildings where the hazardous materials which are being kept, that we are going to classify it as hazardous buildings. Okay. So commercial establishments, earlier what I have told, we call it as a commercial buildings. So these are the different sorts of the buildings that we come across in our day-to-day life activities that we're going to see things and around us. Next thing it is, if I need to construct any sorts of buildings, I require materials. Materials which are required for the construction or maybe the selection, it mainly depends upon certain parameters. What are those certain parameters? Let us get to list about it, and further I'll be going to take it into the next part of the construction activities. What does it refers to? The materials here, it mainly refers to the substances, they may be a solid in state, and this solid type of the materials which have been orderly arranged, it has to be fabricated, it has to be well framed and well designed. That orderly arrangement of the material is what we're going to come across in the constructional phase of the any of the building construction projects. The term build, it refers to the execution of the task starting from the planning of any of the large scale to small scale project, and then you need to go for arriving at the activities, finally completing the activities and leading to the operation and maintenance phase. Next, moving on to here, the materials, as I have stated, there may be solid materials. The solid materials are available in a different types. What are those? It may be a stone is also used as a building material. A brick is also used as a building material. Cement aided with the water, or maybe the cement aided with the sand, or what we're going to call it as a gravel in a layman term, or maybe in a technical term we call it as a fine aggregate, especially for the sand, and coarse aggregate, especially for the gravel. Now, when these sort of materials are being used, in addition to this, timber or whatever the wood which we require for the enclosures where the openings are being provided, in that particular cases, we need to see that the selection of the materials becomes very much important. Whether it depends upon the quality aspects or the quantity aspects, how far the impurities are being presented or not, all these things matters much. Okay. So here in the materials, if I going to list out, let us get to know what are the common materials which we are going to utilize, especially for the building construction purpose. Starting from the stone in the earlier eras like the Indus Valley civilization, Egyptian civilization, or maybe if you are going to take it in the case of an Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, or to the modern extent, if you are going to take any sorts of a mosque, especially for the worship, or maybe a temple, or even churches. All these things has one or the other sorts of materials used for the construction. Okay? Now, let us get to know what are the list of the materials which are being utilized for the construction, so that it becomes very much easier for me to explain and convey to you what are the things that you are going to study in a module wise. So, materials, stone which we are going to use it, and then we come across a brick is also used as a construction material, and then with respect to the next sort of development that has been taken place, it is the concrete blocks. Concrete blocks mainly consists of the fine aggregate, coarse aggregate, we call it as a sand, gravel, and cement, which is used as a binding material. Along with this, the one of the important aspects that has been required is steel, and then you go for using the timber, plastics. Like this, these are the different sorts of the material which we are going to utilize for the construction. Now, building I have explained, the materials which have been utilized for the construction activities are also being explained. Moving on to the next stretch is what is meant by a construction. Construction, it mainly refers to assembly of the materials in an orderly manner so that to give the aesthetic appearance, so that the durability, the life period of any structure will be more, and it is in accordance with respect to the building codes set by the local or the regulating authorities. Okay? Now, moving on to the next aspect, it is construction means. Construction, it involves, in engineering, there is a different sorts of the terminology that has been explained. Whatever the materials that we are going to take in engineering, either maybe not only in civil engineering, in the mechanical engineering, you come across the different sorts of the materials, especially the metals are being utilized to study the nature and the motion. If you take in the case of an electronics, so therefore they go for studying about the silicon and all this allied aspects, the materials, they need to go for using the building of the circuits and all and designing of it. Similarly, for a civil engineer, it varies from a small scale house or a hut to the large scale buildings or multifunctional type of the buildings also. Okay? Next thing it is, in construction aspects, let us get construction. Mainly it involves a proper planning, what does this planning it refers to? That means drafting out what are the things or the materials which have been required, and before you go for the actual construction work, Preliminary field work has to be done. Later onwards, you go for having an actual plan what you need to build in that particular places. Okay? And this proper planning, it also ensures that what kind of the materials are to be required. Whether it may be starting with respect to the stone or maybe with any of the sorts of the materials which are being utilized. Okay? Now here, proper planning should be ensure that the good quality of the materials is utilized for the construction purpose. The quality has to be good, and this is what the requirement for each and every people who reside in their homes in a safe manner. If the requirement is not good in nature, therefore whatever the building materials, if you're going to utilize it, therefore the life period will be much shorter in nature. The next aspect that you're going to study, it is related to based on the requirement and based on the economic concern. What is meant by economic concern? Economic concern is mainly related to utilization of all these materials at an optimal cost. It should be much reliable, feasible, easily available, and it should also be reliable also, so that whatever the cost that is being utilized shall not be too much burden for any of the people, and it should not go for any other financial deficit for them. So for that particular usages, we need to see that the financial concern is also a major part in the construction activities. So based upon the quality of the materials, it has been required. Now I have the materials. If you wanted to require for the construction activities, raw materials cannot be directly utilized. Instead of that, you need to synthesize or process the raw materials. Synthesizing or processing the raw materials, it will be done either through the different sorts of an industry itself only, or they will be naturally utilized, or artificially they go for driving it up, or they go for finishing the requirements based upon the customer utilities. Okay? So here majorly we need to look upon for the concept like how the materials are available. If the materials are available here, if they are in the raw form, how you need to convert into aesthetic form. So therefore, whatever the raw materials which are being available, they are to be processed, raw material, to be processed, and therefore after processing or the synthesizing, we come across for getting out the desirable product as an output. This desirable product is the major concern for the utility of the work. Utility of the work. Okay? Any of the material if you're going to take, whether it may be a stone, it is not normally available, therefore they need to go for the quarrying. Therefore next step it is they need to blast the rocks which are available in the earth, and therefore they need to extract it, and further they need to get the desirable product, then it can be utilized. Similarly, in the case of the brick, or maybe in the case of the concrete blocks or cement, fine aggregate, coarse aggregate, it may be any ceramics materials, all those things. Okay? I think maybe you might have understood now the raw material which may be present, they are having some of the defects. That defects has to be removed. Then only it can be utilized as a desirable product and utility will be maximum. Therefore, if the materials are not in a good manner, or if they possess some impurities which render harm for the construction purpose, or later after the construction purpose, the durability will be less. In that aspects, we need to go for the good requirements. And that is one of the essential parameter for the quality, especially the good requirements and the economic concerns related to this. I hope you might have understand this concept, how it has been related. The constructional phase, it requires the selection of the material, okay, based upon the quality. If the selection of the material is good, therefore the quality is also good. Therefore, the requirement has been matched. Next thing, it is related to economic concern. So this particular part of the cycle, it involves in the complete construction aspects. Okay, fine. Moving on to the next aspect. What are the different things that you need to study here? This course gives an outline regarding to the concepts of building amenities or the portions, starting from the raw materials, selection of the raw materials based upon the requirements, finally utilization or supervision of those materials, how they are to be arranged, how they are to be designed, and how they have to be executed with the masonry works. Okay, what are those contents? Let us get to know one by one. Course outline. The building materials and construction course, it mainly emphasizes on the different exposure of the materials which are utilized for the construction purpose, based upon the selection of the earthen ground for the construction, and then which kind of the materials are being utilized, starting from a substructure, what we call it as a foundation, then a plinth level, finally erection of the walls, and then the placement of the beams or maybe, and then final coverage of the roof, provision for the proper ventilation aspects, provision of the doors or where the openings are to be provided, where the lintels are to be provided. These are the things that you're going to study in the basic part of the building materials and construction. The next part, it is the finishing part. Whenever the materials are being selected, you go for the construction and the execution things happens one by one, and finally the finishing part comes. Finishing part, why it is a major concern? Because it has to look in an aesthetic manner. It has to provide a proper movement of the airflow, proper sunlight entry into the home, and therefore proper protection from the weathering agencies, and literally safety of people against any other theft or any other aspects. So these are the major concern, as well as even the safety from any of the natural calamities. Okay, so the finishing part is related to the plastering, pointing, and later on the painting aspects. Now let us get to know what are the objectives that you need to study related to the building materials and construction. First thing, it is you need to understand what are the things. As you began to entry into a core part of the civil engineering, you need to know each and every aspect of the material used for the civil engineering construction purpose. Okay, for this, to understand the basics or the fundamental aspects of the materials used for the construction. Second part is when the raw materials are being known, the next thing it is foundation or exploration of the soil. Okay, site selection. Okay, for that purpose, selection of suitable soil for construction purpose. The selection mainly involves testing of the soil and exploration for which particular part of the soil you can go for any sorts of construction purpose, whether it is a small scale or a large scale, starting from a small house like 20 by 30, or maybe if it is in by 80 by 100 sort of the sites and all, how we need to go for the planning or execution of the projects, how much part of the foundation is being required, which kind of the soil is being present, so how it is being reacting with respect to the loads and all. Okay, that is what we come across in a structural components. Next, third one, it is related to study of the masonry walls. So application related of the materials in the form especially of studying of the masonry walls and its bondings. Fourth aspect, it is mainly related to the type of the finishes employed in the construction activities. It may be related to the designing aspect itself, okay, to cover up or to know the designing aspects of what? Especially the stairs, provision of the platforms which are being provided, even designing of the foundations also, that what you are going to study it here after this. And in addition to that, you come across the floors. Finally, the types of the finishes. This also include even the doors and windows also. And types of the finishes, starting from the form work and the plastering and pointing, and finally the house looks beautiful when it has been painted. So these are the course objectives that you are going to study in this building materials and construction. Now, what are the course outcomes that you come across? The basic thing it is, when you're going to understand outcome is, you will be applying those concepts. So it is related to the application part, to know what are the materials used for the suitable purposes. Next thing it is, you need to recognize the major fundamental aspects of the selection as well as the designing considerations used for the buildings. Finally, whatever the repair works that comes after the construction phase of the building, that is another major objectives to be set as an outcome, where you're going to come across whatever the repair works or whatever the restoration has to be done or retrofitting has to be done. These are all the set of amenities that you're going to study related to the building materials and construction on a basic and fundamental aspects. Now, Let us move on to the contents of the module. What are the things that you're going to study in building materials and construction? Okay? Now, contents of the module, you're going to study in the module number 1, stone as a building material and how it is being not like a manufactured. Stones which are being available in the natural rock beds, they are excavated, they have been finished and then utilize it for the construction purpose. Similarly, bricks, and then later on for the larger scale we go for using the concrete blocks, mortar, these are the first part of the subject in the module 1 that you're going to study. Second one that you're going to study is related to the timber, how it is being processed, what are the different types of the wood, use it for the construction utilities. And the third aspect that you're going to use is mainly related to the study of the fine aggregate and coarse aggregate. As I told, that study of the components of occurrence of the sand, how it is being processed and utilized, whether it is in an artificial manner or naturally it is being taken up, and coarse aggregate also, it is being crushed in the quarry site itself only, therefore it is being manufactured part. And next stage is that you're going to study in the special case of the fine aggregate, especially the manufactured sand, or what we call it as M sand. Next, in module number 2, mainly study related to the foundations. Before going to lay any sort of a foundation which is a substructure, you need to determine what kind of the soil is being present where you go for building any part of an large scale or any small scale concern. So mainly soil investigation and exploration, and then the foundation. After this, you go for studying the concept of the masonry. A masonry means one complete unit of building is being used with the material and which is being uniformly taken for the construction activities, especially KRS, we call it as a stone masonry, and we're going to take it as a normal 20 or 30 site brick masonry along with the concrete. So therefore, types of the masonry, you're going to study mainly stone as well as the brick masonry. Next thing that you come across, the part is related to the masonry and the bondings. In the module number 3 that you study related to lintel, arches, and then you also study related to the roof. Okay? Even the floors are also coming into the picture. In the module number 4, mainly we come across the doors, which kind of the doors are being provided the windows, ventilation, all these aspects that you're going to study. In addition to this, the formwork component means a temporary structure utilized especially for the supporting when they are being utilized for the construction phase of the building is what we come across as a formwork. In the formwork also, we come across the shoring, scaffolding, underpinning, all these aspects, especially if you need to go for deep foundations and all, where already built building has been present there, therefore you need to go for an underpinning. Okay, shoring and all those things and all you come across to study in the heading of the formwork. Next thing it is, in the model number 5, mainly dealing with respect to the plastering and pointing, the outer covering portion is what we call it as a plastering. Pointing means where the cement mortar is used to join or to bind two consecutive materials is what we call it as a pointing. Okay, plastering, pointing, and then we come across the paints and damp proof materials. Okay, so these are the different portion of the subjects, especially starting from the raw material usages, execution of the part, finally building of the masonry walls and all. Here also come across the cavity walls, different masonry walls also, whether it may be a partition wall or a load bearing wall, all these things you're going to come to study here. Lintels and arches, and therefore the roof, floors also, okay, which kind of the floor finishing that has been required. Model number 4 mainly speaks related to the doors, windows and ventilation utilities with the formwork, the construction of another phase, and finally the finishing of the building is done with the plastering, pointing and the painting. Therefore, the whole building materials and construction is divided into model 5 comprising of all these amenities. And I hope so you might have understood the basic concepts or necessity of the buildings, why it is being utilized for the construction utilities. Therefore, in the next class, let us get to know in the model number 1 which kind of the material was utilized in olden days, how it has been surviving till date, and some of the old renovated part of the materials still thrive to exist today also. So if you are curious about it, stay tuned for that. Let us get into the next part of the class. Thank you one and all.